So if you're tuning in right now, you are watching the replay of a live session. So I've got a few folks here with me right now who are going to be interacting and asking questions along the way, which is wonderful. If you weren't able to be part of that, you're always welcome to shoot me an email, reach out to me through any social media channels, etc. And we can always try to answer your questions there, or we can hop on a call. This information and content is resonating with you, I would like to actually know about that. So thank you to those of you who are able to be here live. It's really hard for an extrovert to get content out of, for me at least, my head and into the world without a conversation. And so for now, I'm going to ask that everyone just sort of mute themselves so that you can unmute when you're ready to ask a question, but we're not going to pick up any background noise. So I'll just mute people. So last time I did sort of the first half of this book, and I went back and sort of listening to it and realized that I want to start actually from the last section of the first half of this book. Here's what we covered last time. I don't know if you had a chance to actually see this. So it was mindset, which is super important. Like, we can't grow, we can't do all the amazing things that we're capable of. We can't do the amazing things we're capable of if we aren't in the right sort of frame of mind around this. And so I talked in that first masterclass about sort of what's holding you back and what it took for me to kind of move through some of that. So I have since written a bunch of content, which is kind of the point of doing these master classes. And I now have words on paper for three full sections and then part of another one. And that's kind of where I'm starting from this point. The part that we did mindset, stacking your successes, setting intentions, and then we ended sort of with this taking the leap. And the leap being actually moving forward with a minimally viable product. And now, the title of this book is now tentatively called Your Relationship-Based Business Plan, Achieve Greater Impact, parentheses, and Income. So I will type that up in the notes in a little while, and I would love to get your feedback. I think it's easier to see visually. And it purposely doesn't say, hey, women who are entrepreneurs, or hey, entrepreneur women, blah, 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 because I'm a guy, and like, that's not cool in my book. And it's also information that anyone of any gender could benefit from, because it's about relationships. And if you kind of get relationships, you're going to find this really appealing, which I understand, socialization wise, is going to lean towards a certain client, which is fine, but I didn't want to exclude people. With that said, this idea of a minimally viable product. So as I work with my clients, they often come to me not with the minimally viable product, which is like, how do you make money? They come to me with a podcast. They come to me with a book. Those are the two most frequent things that happen. Those things don't make you money. Sorry, bubble burst. It just doesn't immediately translate into like riches and fame, but it does establish credibility. It does set you up for success down the line. It does, as Derek Clark would call it, make you a recognized expert. The minimally viable product really should be coming not from your head and your oh my God, there's this like shiny object that I really want to have. I really want to have a mastermind. I really want to have a course, right? Those are things that when I say, well, how are you going to make money from the book or from the podcast? They're like, ooh, maybe I'll do a mastermind. And it's like, these things should really, in a lot of ways, come from the people that you serve. And you should know the formats can change, but you should figure out what will work best for them. And so that takes time. That takes really kind of getting to know your ideal clients. And I have to tell you, this whole talk of ideal clients has long frustrated me, because for years, I didn't know who that was. I left my day job 4 years ago, actually the day before Thanksgiving 4 years ago. So the clients that I was serving then, I knew were not the clients I wanted to be serving going forward. And so I immediately signed up for all these online courses and talked to coaches, and they all started with, okay, so you start with your ideal client and you talk, and I'm like, who are these people? I didn't know. And so if you're in that spot, I feel you, and it's okay. You got to keep trying different things. But one of the things you have to be doing is paying attention. So anyone who knows the story of how I did find my ideal clients, the short answer is they found me. And I was dense. I was super dense about this for quite a while. I mean, months, not years, fortunately. But actually, I would say that who I think of as my ideal client now, I've actually been speaking with this demographic for probably the last 5 years. I really just did not see them in that particular way, and it just did not connect. It didn't compute. So pay attention to certain things. Who who reaches out to you for help? What kind of help? What do they ask you about? What do you confidently answer? You know what I mean? It's like, it may not be your job even. It may not be even the thing you're selling. It might just be, yeah, I know something about that. So for instance, I now help people with their book launch. I help people with their podcast launch. I'm by no means an expert in these things, but I have successfully done it for myself. People see that, they reach out to me. And then it came to my attention that the same people who are reaching out to me and for those are actually also looking for other ways that I could be helping them grow their business. So even though I don't want to be known as a book launch coach, like I don't want that to be the sole thing people think of me for, it's helpful for me to recognize that it is a skill set that I have. It's information other people want, and that it actually attracts to me the kind of people that I ultimately want to be working with. So that's why I created this sort of free masterclass series. The first 3 of them were, should I write a book? Should I host a podcast? And book launch strategies. And that was very deliberate. And I actually did those 3 in 3 weeks. Like, I talked to a business coach about the idea and I started doing them. And at first, I called them video chats. Even in my file names in my computer, I called them video. I didn't know what to call them. After I'd done 2 of them, I realized they were master classes because the content, the value of the content, the prep that I'd put in, the quality of the questions made them master classes, and I rebranded all of them. This is part of how you find your MVP. This is the pre-work that you do, is that you got to get in front of your audience. Now, I did it through master classes. You could be just getting on calls or video chats, like Zoom calls with people who fall into the kind of people you like to work with. You could be asking past clients to meet with them and ask, what was it about working with you that really helped them? How do they see you? That'd be really interesting information, right? How do they see you? How do you sort of present yourself in the world? And Dory Clark, who is, my mentor, my friend, I've known her for a decade. She's amazing. I honestly don't know that I've had a conversation with a professional in this sort of entrepreneur arena and not brought her name up, because she's always an incredible resource and inspiration. And if they don't know her, they want to. And if they know her, they get reminded of her resources. So when she decided to do a course, she started with a series of Zoom calls, right? So when I was ready to do an online program, I went to her and sort of said, I got this idea. I'm going to do an online course. And she said, you are going to learn so much, which is not advice. It's a prophecy. And it was true. I decided I was going to follow her footsteps because everything she's done is done well. I wanted to see if I could pull it off. So I did a series of Zoom calls, just like she did. But the other thing I did that she had done, and she learned this actually from Miracy, which is Danny Inney's company, and she's now advising on their advisory board. She surveyed her members with a series of Google Forms before each session. She sort of said, here's the topic. What do you need to know about it? What do you know about it? What are your questions? And then after each session, she had the same sort of, how did you feel about that? What did you like? What could I do less of, etc. And she had 40 people in that first group. I mean, this is Dory, so she was able to do that in like 20 minutes. I mean, I think it was an hour and 45 minutes she filled it. So that's Dory. I can't do that. You probably can't do that, or else you probably wouldn't be hanging out with me right now on this call. But I got my 4 people in my initial group, and I started surveying them. And in fact, one person dropped out before we even got started. Interestingly, that person does not fit my demographic of who my ideal client is, and the other 3 do. And it sort of further reinforced, in retrospect, why my work resonates with certain people and not with others. And that's helpful because I can't be all things for all people. I have a topic, networking, that is very broad and very general and could be applied to anybody. Pretty much anybody. And I've had people tell me, oh, you should really work with sales teams. I have no interest. I just don't have it in me. I don't have it in me to make that my primary focus of my business. I think I can do it. I've done some one-on-one coaching for sales team members. I will go in and do a session for sales teams, but I don't want that to be my focus because it doesn't fill me up. That's an important piece of all of this. So as I sort of did all this testing, mind you, I still didn't know who my ideal clients were, and then the second iteration of my program, I did it where it was a mixture of master classes and masterminds. And it was 90 days. So I went from 5 Zoom calls scheduled over 9 or 10 weeks to 90 days. And in that time, I also got some additional training. And I wanted to say that, like you, I have signed up for just a multitude of courses. I mean, the bar on my Chrome is just filled, my bookmark bar, with courses that I've bought since 2015. Because if they're there, maybe I'm going to click on them one day. That's a lot of just in case learning. I think what was different is that I knew I wanted to learn more about running a mastermind. So I got some just in time learning. And this distinction was drawn to my attention by Pat Flynn of Smart Passive Income. And he is quoting the advice that he heard from Jason Van Orden, who at the time was the host of Internet Business Mastery, which grew to be one of the biggest business podcasts on iTunes. And he has since moved on to other projects. But this just-in-time versus just-in-case learning is, I think, a really key distinction as you're growing your business. So I got some training on how to run good masterminds. And I said to the person, Liz Scully, who runs this Mastering Masterminds, I don't want to just do a mastermind. Because I've learned that what my people need is not just a mastermind. They need some education. They need some content that helps them get clarity before they just get thrown into a mastermind. And that was now, if I hadn't done all this work with these different groups, I don't know that I would have figured that out. I would have just run a pure mastermind. But because my first 5 Zoom calls were content-based, they weren't just masterminds. She helped me understand that you can't kind of do both those things in one call. You can have different calls for different things, and thus that formula was created. I tested it this summer, and now in January, it's iterating again, and now it's 6 months long. The first 90 days are the same as the summer, where people come in and get some focus, some clarity, and then the second 90 days is all masterminding, because that's when you get to implement. Because I also learned from my summer cohort that after it ended, they all reached out to me for further questions about their projects, because I left them at that crucial moment where they had that clarity and then they needed support. This is what I mean by iterating and testing and just retesting and reiterating your minimally viable product. Minimally viable means that I didn't invest in 20 hours of videotaping myself, professionally editing it, putting it up on, Thinkific, and then trying to sell it to a group of people. That would be the opposite of all of this. That would be making a ton of assumptions and building something that maybe nobody wants. So super important that as you're taking this leap and you're getting your head wrapped around, I'm going to test some things out, that you don't just decide what it will be, but you listen to what people need it to be, and that you trust that process. Dory has now evolved to the point where her online course, it's no longer Zoom calls. It's content that is sitting on a Thinkific type platform. I think she actually uses Thinkific, and people kind of go through at their own pace. And she does these monthly webinars, either with an interview or a Q&A. And she's got this very vibrant, thriving Facebook community that has come from this as well. And these cohorts that sort of join all in the same moment, which I think is part of the success, is that people are kind of on a path together, even though people do take the course at different speeds. So, even in the way I'm creating this book, I'm following this minimally viable product sort of model. And if you want more about this model, Lean is the book. Was about manufacturing, and people are applying this to all kinds of online worlds now. And so I'm going to be reading that again and sort of weaving in some of this as we go. So the next section is commit. And I think this is actually an area that we get close to success, but then we're not determined. We're not definite in our commitment, and we let things kind of slip from our grasp when they're so close. And I think this happens all the time. You're trying something new. This minimally viable product is a new thing. It's of your own invention. It's your name on the line. Initially, I was working with a business coach, Michael Roderick, when I launched my program initially. And he helped me with the original sales page because it was something I wasn't very comfortable doing. And despite the sales page, my ideal clients found me. It was not written towards them. But then when I went to do a second time, I updated the sales page, I added testimonials, and 250 people went to the page. But nobody clicked the link to schedule a call with me about actually joining. If I didn't have a business coach, I'm not sure how I would have proceeded. I had two things. I had a business coach, but I also had declared that quarter, which was quarter Q1, January, February, March of earlier this year, was going to be the quarter that I would launch the second cohort. And that is such an important piece of the puzzle. I didn't say 2018, I will continue this. I said by March of this year, I will do this. Which meant March came, 250 people had looked at the page, no one had signed up, and I only noticed it in a way that I had to do something about it because of that deadline and because I was checking in with a coach. And he just recently said to me, that a sales page is good when people are buying. That's the only metric that matters. You could follow all the formulas and have all the things and the testimonials and the, what size font, whatever, colors. Ultimately, do people buy? And no one was buying. So obviously something wasn't working. And I had the realization that the women were reaching out to me for help launching their book, launching their podcast, for business strategy in that same 5 or so weeks. And they were all women that were entrepreneurial, and they were all in their 50s. And it just finally clicked. And when I rewrote the page and went back to those same women, and honestly, they didn't even go to the page. I went back to an email thread and just sort of said, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you want to talk about it? And that's when I started to actually get traction. So I had to change my game. And I was determined to do it though. Like I knew that I would learn nothing about what it takes to run an online coaching program if I did not keep testing this. Like if I let it go and got sucked into some other project, uh, a year would go by and I wouldn't be any closer to knowing what to do right. The only way to learn is to keep doing things. And so that's the commitment to testing, to iterating, and to giving yourself those deadlines. So I can't stress enough the importance of having one major and two minor goals for each quarter of the next year. And I would say about halfway through the year, you'd reassess and readjust what those goals might be. And ideally, the minor goals are going to be setting your major goals for later in the year, sort of up for success. And that's sort of the creating momentum and building on your success and stacking your successes that I talked about earlier. But if I hadn't had that quarterly goal, I'd be getting to the end of 2018 kind of thinking, I wonder what I should do differently. It didn't seem to work. Like an entire year could have gone by. Instead, I changed things up. I reached out to people one-on-one who were already people connecting with me. It filled within a couple of weeks. It happened over the summer. And I was able to then continue to iterate. Now it's 6 months long. Like I didn't go from 5 Zoom calls to 6 months long. I did 5 Zoom calls, 90 days, 6 months. And I'm not saying you should follow the exact formula. I'm just saying that it's iterative and it's building on something, and I'm learning along the way. So because I'm so into relationships, and I want to just, again, talk about how this relates to the world of making connections, building a strong network, because it's going to be your network. It's going to be people who know you that are buying. And I think all the time we make this mistake of trying to cold sell when so much of our stuff is who we are. The people who are bought from me this past year know me, have gotten to know me through these online groups that we're in, these like Facebook groups, have known me for years, maybe through local community. So, I'm not at a point where I'm like putting up a Facebook ad driving people to a sales page and they're like, oh yeah, perfect, I'm going to buy that. That's not happening. And instead I have to think about how to nurture and sustain the network that I have. And one thing that's related to this commitment model is that I think there's a difference between what I call intensive networking and scattershot networking. If you go to a group, let's say you're thinking like, well, I have a real life example actually. I decided I needed to get to know meeting planners. I want to work more and more with associations to help them design more engaging conference experiences for all attendees, particularly first timers and those attending solo. So I had the opportunity to talk to someone who is in that world. And she said, you should join Meeting Professionals International, the New England chapter. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to go do that. If I had shown up 3 times sort of over the next 12 months, sort of randomly, it probably would have gotten me no traction. Here's what I did do. I got introduced, that person who sort of made the suggestion, introduced me to the board member who was in charge of getting newsletter content. And via email, we had an exchange and I offered to write something for her newsletter. Now, this is actually one of these benefits both people kind of things. They always need the content and I'm trying to like establish myself in this space. So we make an agreement. I give her something and without any edits, she puts it in and it comes out. And like 2 days later is the first meeting that I go to. So I walk into the first meeting having already offered something to this group, right? And the woman, when she finally saw me in the room, was so warm and friendly. Oh, this is Robbie. His article's in this month's newsletter, So then I just followed my little, look for the croissants, look for the openings. And my question was, hey, do you know any of the board members? Because I'd love to meet some of the board members. Once I met one board member, I then got to meet all of them. So I met 9 board members that first meeting. And because they're the volunteers that are putting the most into this. And that's who I thought I wanted to meet, right? But I made note of what committees they're on, what they're in charge of, the areas of their expertise, what they did. And I left and I made notes. I made little notes and I sent very specific follow-up messages to each of them. I also went around that first meeting and I took pictures of myself. I did selfies, which I don't do often enough, but I did selfies with these board members and with other people in the chapter. Right before I went to my second meeting a month later, 2 things happened. One, another article came out in the newsletter written by me. And 2, on social media, I posted all those selfies and said, looking forward to reconnecting with, and I tagged as many of them as I could, and the photos. So now they know I'm coming back. They remember who I am, right? My content was then shared on LinkedIn. I reshared it and tagged MPI. And I went back to my third meeting, and I went back for a fourth meeting. I got to know the president, who then became the immediate past president. We hit it off. We had a great one-on-one time at one of these meetings. She works out like a 5-minute walk from my house. So we've met up for lunch. We've made plans to get together. So I stopped going to meetings in June. I went to meetings January through June every single month. Summer got busy. Fall was busy. Guess who reached out to me to ask whether I would be willing on a less frequent basis? I kept doing the newsletters until August. They said, would you do newsletters 4 times a year next year? So I just had a call with that board member. And what am I writing about in January? How to do this, how to approach this kind of opportunity, a chapter like this, something that meets monthly, Rotary Club, right? It doesn't matter, chamber, and make yourself known. So the intensive networking is to go frequently, at least 3 times in a row, but with some intention around being seen, being part of it, stepping up, participating in a big way, and you don't have to go every month, because then people will still remember you and think of you and invite you to things and pass your name along when it's the referral is the right thing. What a lot of people do is they scattershot, they show up, their boss tells them, go to this meeting, and they hand out their cards. I call it spraying and praying. They like dole their cards out, and it's basically live spam. Like it's just spamming people. And they disappear for another few months. Maybe they come back again a few months later. Nobody is looking forward to seeing them. They have not made a great impression. And the effort to go 3 times throughout the year and 3 times in a row is the same. The number of hours, the travel, all that is the same. So I just think you can kind of focus your energy. And this is also true for online spaces. I am a member of, I don't even know, dozens of Facebook groups. I am active in 3 to 5. It sort of cycles a little bit. There are 3 in particular that I can name that I'm very active in. And there's like usually a couple of others that are sort of usually dependent on the moment. I can't possibly be active in dozens. I can't. And when I pop into those other groups and post something, like even an invitation to be part of this masterclass today, it's crickets. When I post something in a community that I've been active in, people show up. In fact, I can see people in this group right now who are from those online spaces that I am most active in. It's like a perfect example. So again, like similarly, show up intensely with commitment. And this is where the quarterly goals could be helpful. A minor goal could be for you to really nurture your community connections in a particular Facebook space or at a particular in-person gathering. If it's an annual conference, you might decide that this is the year you're going to volunteer and you're going to submit a session proposal. You're going to go above and beyond and host a dinner, a social, an informal social related to it, or breakfast or drinks or something, that you're going to make the effort to really be seen in this space. That's another piece of that commitment. And then I'm going to just pause and see if there's any questions about sort of the taking the leap part and that commitment part before I want to talk about stretching yourself and getting support. Feel free to unmute yourself if you've got any thoughts or comments, questions. I'll ask this a different way. Is this helpful?
Yeah, I think it's helpful, and I find it very helpful just to watch what your process has been, and because you're modeling for us, right? I mean, you're teaching us specific things, and then you're also modeling by what you're doing and how you're, organizing and approaching all this. So yeah, I find it very, very helpful.
Interestingly, is my wife knows that I host a monthly gathering in Boston, and I've invited some of my current/past clients to come to it because they live in the area, and it's a mastermind dinner. Different people come in and out, so it's not a formal mastermind in the way you might have these 4 people always, but I've been running that for a few years, and she said, "Isn't it awkward when you share the things that you're struggling with?" Because they're their clients or your prospective clients. And what Jenny just said is how I responded to my wife, that the reason they want to work with me is that they can see in what I do what they can be doing. It's hard when I'm going to use Dory as an example again. You see Dory, it's hard to see the effort, the time, the commitment, the energy that she put in for the last decade. It's hard to see that. She's so much further along than all of us. So, if there's a ladder, I'm only a couple of rungs ahead, like making it happen. So to me, that transparency, I don't know whether that's like a brand thing or it's like, but I think that's the way I find the people I want to work with. They are like, yeah, I get it. I think what you're doing is good, and I want to see how it would apply for how I work. So I say that also because as you are engaging with these communities and you are starting to test things, don't feel like you have to sort of hide in a corner doing those tests. Like, share the results. Let people know what you've tried and what's worked. Invite people into the process. If you ask for feedback from 16 people, then maybe wrap it all up and share back to all of them. Here's kind of what I learned. Here are the bullets of what I learned. Because the people who want to keep talking to you even after that moment are your people. Like they're deeply invested in your success. So thank you for sharing that, Jenny, because I think that's brought up an interesting point. And thank you for the nods from everyone else who's got their video camera on. So the next section here is about, I have, let me think. So another thing I did just before I move on the commit, which was sort of part of the iteration process, is I kept changing the way I described my work in a 1-sentence line in my email signature. I'm still doing this. Like, happens all the time. And also as I sent to different people, I was thinking like, is this going to resonate? And so that was kind of a daily reminder to me that I was kind of iterating, and it meant that as people saw that, it might change how they responded to me. It changed the way I talked about my work. It was another way of testing out the answer to the what do you do question, which is, instead of answering, name, rank, serial number, I am a coach. None of that. Don't do that. I wanted to say, like, I help blank do blank, or that sort of syntax. And so instead of running around to lots of events and testing out those phrases all the time, which I also was doing, I then instead put it on my email signature, which was another way of testing your sort of opening line, you might say, or a description of, what do you do? That was sort of an interesting way to test that. So stretching yourself is what I think of as the next thing, because you've got your MVP, you put it out into the world, you've committed to like iterating it, you're testing different things, you're starting to see some success, and then don't rest. This is not the moment to be like, all right, I'm good. I got this 90-day program. I can just kind of rinse and repeat. I'm just going to go to autopilot. I'm rushing to evergreen. I mean, this is a mistake that I think some people make, is that we've all been sold this passive income fantasy. Nothing passive about it. The people who are making money in that sort of passive way are still working. They're just working smarter. They're testing, they're iterating. It's not like you create a piece of content once and immediately put it up as evergreen and then you just start getting money. And it just isn't happening. And people are starting to change. Buyers, and we are also all buyers. So I think this will resonate. We're not just coaches and speakers. We're buyers of these products. We want human interaction. We don't just want to buy a course that is a series of videos. That is the market shift. The market shift is that you can no longer just put up a series of videos, no matter how polished they are. And actually, it doesn't matter how polished they are, as long as the content is good. You have to have some interaction. You, as the coach, need to interact with your members. And part of the reason is that there's all these, Udemy, Udemy, I don't know how people pronounce that, and other things like that are charging ridiculously low prices and sort of suppressing the value of what a course is. And so to rise above that and to be a true thought leader and a true expert and an authority in your space, you have to offer more than just a sort of series that people can follow at any moment in an evergreen kind of style. And so stretching yourself is also to keep thinking like, well, how do I continuously add value? What could I do that either someone else is doing or I could do something a little different than what other people are doing? And what's strange about this is that you have to try these different things without being attached to the outcome. Like you have to just create the possibility. And that's really hard because at this point, you're probably thinking, I'm finally making some money. Like, I'll just do this. But you'll, A, provide way more value, and B, probably way increase your influence and your income by stretching yourself. So when my clients go through this 90-day program, every time this has happened, they reach a point where they actually have to rewrite their goals because what they came in thinking they wanted to accomplish, and then 90 days later, what they believe they can accomplish has completely changed. And so similarly, as you set these quarterly goals to keep making different iterations and you kind of get to a place where you're like, this is working. I'm finally seeing people be attracted to this product. It's working. That's when you have to actually set your goals bigger. You can't at that moment think like, okay, I'm done. And it might be that you want to add a in-person piece. Is there a retreat that happens either at the very beginning, in the middle, or at the end of your program? Are you turning the content of the program into a book so that you can, again, build your authority, attract new people to the program, right? Help more people. So it's hard to know what that will be until you get there. You can't see the 6 steps ahead that you're going to have to go through until you get to that point. But it is about taking that minimally viable product to the next level. I want to tell you a story about not being attached to outcome as it relates to building your network, because at this point of your MVP journey is also when you need to start connecting with bigger influencers in your space. You need to be reaching out to and getting to know the people who operate at a higher level that are attracting, probably more dollars, that are doing things that you don't feel ready for. But you need to be surrounding yourself with that community because, the whole who we're surrounded by is kind of how we are, our outlook in the world is based on who we're surrounded by. But I think the way to do this is through generosity, not through begging and not through stalking and not through, making people feel bad as you reach out to them. So I have this theory that I call the philosophy of abundance. And for years, I mean, literally back to when I had a BlackBerry, which, what year was that? What year did I have a BlackBerry? Early aughts. I never get to say the word aughts anymore. So I would go to these meetings about twice a month. Someone would invite me for coffee, and I would meet them an hour before my work started at a coffee shop a block from my office. And I would show up with my BlackBerry in my brain, and they would ask me questions, and I would answer them. And my mother got wind of this about 2 years into me doing this, and she said, "Oh my God, you're giving it all away. Why are you giving it all away? You need to be paid for all of this." And here's how I answered her. I told her that it's like giving rides to the airport. You only give rides to the airport if you have a relationship with someone, right? You have the resources they need. You have the time. You have the car. And the person you're doing it this favor for recognizes it as a favor, right? They are the kind of person who would see that as a favor and appreciate it. If you become the kind of person who regularly gives rides to the airport, one day you're going to need a ride. Yes, you're going to get a ride. And the magical thing is that it will likely not even be from someone that you drove. It'll be someone who sees you as the kind of person who gives rides to the airport. If you're that giver, people are going to want to support you. So that's a practice. It's a practice of just figuring out that how do you give a little bit. And so I talked earlier in this book about little bits of value, but this is really just like thinking about how to be generous in these new spaces, how to kind of build your stage a little bit bigger, how to keep showing up and keep offering, sometimes literally driving people to the airport. In fact, if you are a part of an association that has local chapter meetings and someone routinely each month flies in to speak, right? Offer to be the person who either picks them up and or drives them to the airport. Just think about that for a moment. Who are the people that will fly in? They are the influencers and the experts in the field in which you are part of this association. You are going to pick them up from the airport and spend anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes in a car with just them. Even if you don't talk business, you are establishing a connection that you can follow up with. Much more so than the 40 people who are in the room who hear the talk and line up to, shake that person's hand. So that's kind of what I mean by just thinking about those moments of generosity, the moments of abundance. How do you offer information you have, the knowledge you have? And the thing is that it doesn't deplete you to share those things. You give someone your time, you give someone your money. Yes, there's less of it. But if you give knowledge, it just creates possibilities. And so when you're doing this, you're not doing it with an outcome in mind. If you're stuck on, if you're attached to an outcome, this rarely works. Because if you're attached to the outcome, then it's a transaction. And transactions do not foster relationships. They're just utterly different. So at this moment with your MVP, and even before this, you'd be thinking about how to really foster those kinds of relationships and make those kinds of connections. And ultimately setting bigger goals, right? Like bigger goals with your business, bigger goals with the network that you have. Some of you know that I'm in the middle of this moment for myself. My podcast has been around for January will be 2.5 years. So nearly 2.5 years. Next Tuesday, so based on when this is live, Seth Godin is my guest. And that's a pretty big deal for me. Thank you, Jenny. And I'm not even like a huge person for Seth. Like, it's not even Seth was like my number one. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to Seth. I'm just like, it just never even dawned on me that I have a chance to talk to him. Like, period. I cannot believe that happened. And it happened because I asked him. So now I'm thinking, who else can I ask? Well, before I had much of an opportunity to think about who else I should ask, my virtual assistant made me a list of people that she would like me to interview because she's the first person who listens to them and writes the show notes. So she drew me up a short list of amazing women to reach out to. And so now I am consciously trying to up my network because over the last few years, I built a network where it doesn't seem ridiculous to think I should be able to reach out to Brene Brown. Not that she'd say yes, but that I should be able to contact her and at least get a reply. Because I have over the last 4 years established a network that makes that a possibility, right? And the evidence is Seth Godin, but I couldn't just stop there. I have to stretch, right? I have to continue to stretch because where my podcast, guest list started and where it is now and where it could be in 2 years, I have to keep stretching. So it's another example of sort of how to do that. So I'm going to pause and see if anyone has any thoughts on this section. And you can also just chime in and tell me what's resonating, what you'll take home with you.
So we've talked before about how introverted I am and you are not. So I have no problem whatsoever with letting my mind spin and think of all of these creative things. When it comes to actually making the jump to speak with a stranger, I have so much agita that I break through that just about 50% of the time. And the other 50%, I'm just like staring at my phone. So do you have any insights on how to break through that?
Well, some of it is the planning beforehand. I might also point out, Gina, that your best friends started out as strangers.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's just true for all of us. Like that, So, and the way you meet these people is that you have something in common, you find a connection. And so I look for what I call uncommon commonalities when I'm meeting people. Just things that would be not an expected connection, because that always draws people in. Another thing is I've learned that you can ask anyone who has children about having children, either because you're thinking of having them, because you do have them, because you can't believe you had them, and you're like, oh, I can't believe I had them. But that generally you can find some commonality with parents. Just even if they're grandparent age and you've got little babies, they're still going to have thoughts on this. Also, you can ask people for advice. I would say I like when I can start by thanking someone in some really specific way and then follow up with a really specific, like, I'd love some thoughts on this. People tend to like to hear themselves talk and want to sound smart, and you've just given them a platform to do both those things. So you can't do that on the spot, though, very easily. So if you know you're going to a space that there might be certain kinds of people, or you might know people in particular that are going to be there, doing your prep work. And part of it might even be reaching out ahead of time online. And so if it's a conference or a association meeting that happens frequently and there's some sort of Facebook community or a LinkedIn group or even like a Twitter hashtag that's pretty active, participate in those spaces in the weeks leading up to you going. Share other people's stuff, comment on other people's stuff, like other people's stuff, support people when they say they're looking for something, or congratulate them when something good happens. That will help you become more familiar with some people. They'll get some sense of who you are. You're already giving something before you even walked in the room. And then the sort of further step that I would suggest to you, and I talked about quite a bit in my first book, is to actually think about hosting your own gatherings. These can be attached to a big event or just dinner gatherings, salons, brunch, coffee, whatever. I actually just found an email from 2010 when I was hosting what I then called Dine and Discuss. I was actually co-hosting dinners with Dory now and again, and with like a few other people locally. I would just find one other person, we'd co-host. We'd each bring, I think, 3 people out to a restaurant. And it just was a nice way to establish a stronger connection with my co-host, and for me to invite people I knew to a nice space, and for me to meet 3 other people that my co-host had invited. And that's like a smaller space. It's not this overwhelming room that you're trying to figure out how to navigate. And because you're the host, your job really is just to make everyone else feel, comfortable and welcomed, and have some minor structure, flexibility of like, who, let's do some introductions, and here's a question for us all to answer. And hey, you two have this in common. And you don't even have to say very much. You just have to nurture the space. I think that would be so great for you, Gina. Like, I happen to love it, but I actually think it's an amazing option for someone who is shyer or more introverted. Dory Clark is an introvert. She doesn't have the energy to go shake hands at 16 events a week. When she moved from Boston to New York City, she set a goal of twice a month dinners. And that's how she built her network. She didn't go to all these other things. She invited twice a month. She co-hosted dinners, and her network grew. And that's how she established herself in New York City very, very quickly. So I think, if you have a local community, that's a good place to start. If you're going to a conference, I was going to an event for the first time. I hosted a breakfast and drinks event that I scheduled ahead of time and talked up through social media. And it gave me a reason to know 20 people before I even got there, for people to be looking for me. So I hope, is that helpful to?
It's very helpful. I think often I do offer something. So when I joined NSA New England, I offered an auction item, but
Yeah.
then I do always come with the offer, but then I don't follow through and like make connections and do the other stuff. Like, I'm good at the giveaway.
Yeah, and then it's just like nurture that.
Inserting myself into the conversation is a little trickier for me.
Well, and then the other piece would be to ask people, hey, do you want to hop on a Zoom call after this meeting? Do you want to we had Tamsin Webster came to the chapter and talked about the red thread, and someone said we should get together. And so 4 of us got together a couple days later and talked about her content.
That's awesome.
Like that would be a great example for what you could do. Like, if you go to a conference and someone was really awesome, you could all hop on a Zoom call, you and 3 other people, to talk about the content of one of the sessions you're in. And that sort of further establish. First of all, you're a leader by being the person who makes the suggestion. And then people show up and get value just by you convening them. I think that's a really powerful thing that leaders can do.
Okay.
So any other questions or thoughts before we hop onto this next section? And this is the last section I'm going to do today. All right. So,
I was just going to add on the Zoom, Gina, you mentioned, I think you said something about like hating calling people on the phone or something. I actually hate talking to people on the phone too. And I don't know why, because I actually spent 15 years working remotely on the phone. But I have found Zoom totally different than phone calls, and really, really awesome, fun, easy. People seem to enjoy it. So yeah, I'd encourage you to give that a try. It's been really good for me.
And it's a thing you can practice before it's a big deal. Like, you could just literally say, Jenny, then we should just hop on a Zoom call.
Right.
And that would be a way for you to find out what that feels like. And you just start to like, whenever you're somewhere and you're like, you're kind of cool, let's just hop on a Zoom call. Like, just get in the habit of making that an ask, and inevitably people are going to say yeah, and then you'll get comfortable with that medium and realize the value of how you could use it in other applications. So
thank you, Jenny, for the suggestion. That's great.
Sure.
So the last piece that I was going to cover here was going to talk about getting support. Because this is all well and good, but you're not doing it on your own. You're absolutely not doing it on your own. And there's a few different, and I'm going to run through a list of them. There's a few different ways you can get support. I'm going to run through a list, and then I'm going to talk about each one, because I think there's pros and cons and differences between them. So one is an accountability partner. Then there's masterminds. There's getting a coach. There's personal board of directors. And there are consultants. So accountability partners. You probably have already had someone like this in your life. It's the person who says, hey, let's go to the gym together, right? Like, that's an accountability partner, right? Now it's the question of, in the world of business, how do you have one? So I'm working on a new book. Like my first book, I have an accountability partner. just for this book. So to me, accountability partners work best when they are project-based. They're not forever. They will probably have, there will be an ending at some point. Ideally, you'll find someone who is themselves working on a project that has a similar time frame as yours, so that they understand the intensity that you're trying to get this done under. They're committed, and they also want to be held accountable for their work. A weekly check-in call, it could be just 30 minutes. I talk too much. My accountability partner and I spend an hour a week on a Zoom call. It absolutely could be done in 30 minutes. This should not be a question of time. It gets you such clarity of where should I be focusing next. If you're feeling kind of stuck, I almost didn't do this masterclass. I hadn't gotten as much writing done as I wanted to. I'd written most of that first half. I've written, but then I didn't get any further. A lot of things happened in life, and some of it just happened last Tuesday, and you all witnessed it for the United States election. But I just couldn't pull myself back into the work. And she sort of talked me through the pros and cons of doing this. And in the end, I was like, I'm going to just do this. Now, you should know that for me to set this up, just to get the landing page done and invites and all the emails, it's about 2.5 hours. And I know this because I have a checklist and I go through it, and I had 2.5 hours to get it done before I had to leave. And I kind of that includes posting it in a few places. And I didn't think to even send it to my own email list until the next morning. So thankfully I did remember. So it was a commitment to do it, but I know the value is I'm going to have these conversations. It's going to reignite for me writing on this book, and my accountability partner helped me realize that and sort of acknowledge that she's also in that slump where she's gotten a lot done and there's always a little bit of a divot. And now it's time for both of us to kind of pick ourselves up and set new deadlines. And that also is because we both had set deadlines to have our first draft done in the beginning of November, which was an impossible goal. And yet I knew that by scheduling that, by putting that out there, I would write much more than if I had not done that. And that is absolutely the case. I know for a fact. But then November 4th, which was my deadline of 10 weeks, came and went, and I hadn't done it. So I think that was part of it. But having an accountability partner was able to say, yes, but you knew when you set that, that was an unrealistic goal. Don't let that demoralize you and stop you from working on this. What's your new goal? Right? That's where an accountability partner can be so beneficial. The hard part with accountability partners is when they are not actually working as hard as you are. When they slack off, when they disappear, that's problematic. So you definitely want to carefully choose somebody who's going to stick with you. And I think in some ways it's helpful at the very beginning to sort of say that this is project based, and that I guess it's so you outgrow each other. Your needs are going to change. So just assume that from the beginning. If that doesn't happen, you stick together forever. That's wonderful, but that's not how you're going into it. And then let's see. I want to talk about the difference between that and a coach. So a coach is a knowledge or content expert. A coach knows things. A coach's lived the path you're trying to walk. A coach can steer you clear of some major pitfalls, ask you really good questions. Now, it's great if your accountability partner can do that, but most of the time an accountability partner is really like, hey, did you do the thing you said you were going to do last week? Okay, well, what are your ways to get around that? Okay, so what are you going to do next week? That's not coaching, that's accountability. A coach is, okay, what's at the root of why you're not getting there? What's holding you back? Or what do you need to learn? Or who do you need to know for this to be more successful? The coach is going to be more probing, keeping you accountable, probably not speaking with you with the same frequency. It might be every 2 weeks, it might be monthly. So a coach kind of gives you some homework, and then you got to kind of get it done. And I actually think an accountability partner might be beneficial if you're working with a coach, again, to kind of keep you on task. Accountability partners are also no money. It's two peers that want to support each other. A coach, depending on what the coach offers you, can be anywhere from, $100 an hour to several $100 an hour. So it's not cheap. It's a commitment. It's an investment in yourself for you to have a coach. It's kind of like when you go to the gym and you have a trainer versus you going on your own or even going with a friend. When you have a trainer, they create routines for you. They count your reps for you. They motivate you. That's what a coach is doing for you in this as well, because they're not going to let you slack off, and they're going to help you overcome hurdles. A mastermind, there are two different kinds. There's a peer mastermind, and then there's a paid mastermind. That's how I think of them. I have both. I have a peer mastermind that I put together. I went to a conference with the intention of learning about masterminds and putting one together for me, a peer mastermind. And I left with two people that I knew I wanted to do this with, and then added a person from my world to this. And we've been meeting for over a year now. And we meet once a month. And it's kind of like having accountability partners, but they also, because you've known each other for a much longer period of time, they get to know you. They get to know what your like hangups are and where your strengths are, and they'll push you. It's not coaching per se. They're not necessarily like knowledge or content experts, but they get to know who you are, and they're not going to let you say, "Oh, I just don't know if that's the right thing." They're going to be like, "Okay, why?" That's a really good mastermind. And masterminds have been around since the days of Ben Franklin. This is not a new concept, but it has become all the rage. And when done right, it's very powerful. The paid mastermind has the benefits of a curated group and a facilitator who knows what they're doing. A peer mastermind, you may not know the people as you're pulling them in. You might be assigned people even. Hey, you 4 people sitting together at a table. Now you're a mastermind. Meet every month for the next 4 months. Like that could just be how it starts. And somebody in a peer mastermind has to step up to facilitate, has to step up in that way to keep things going. And one, that person may not exist in that group. Somebody will fill in. And two, it puts an onus on that person to then play a dual role of both being a member, a participant, and to keep the clock and to make sure we're following the format and all those things. A paid mastermind, a professional takes care of that for you, which is pretty amazing. And they will carefully curate the group so that you will be with other people of like mind with similar challenges. And they cost money. They definitely cost money. And again, the amount of money will range depending on the expertise of the person who's doing it, where you're probably going to talk about into the thousands of dollars. And then personal board directors. This is a concept I heard about from Dory Clark. It's in her first book, Reinventing You. And it's basically mentorship is something that a lot of people say they want, but they have a hard time finding. A personal board of directors is a way of achieving that desired goal of having a mentor without setting yourself up to walk up to someone and say, "Hi, will you be my mentor?" Which feels just like a big ask. And to that person, they're like, "I don't know if I can do all of that." Like that's asking a lot. Personal board directors are a group of people that you sort of collect and curate along the way who have knowledge, expertise, or abilities that you respect, that you admire, that you would like to see in yourself. And the way it might start, I'll give you an example of someone who's on mine. I went to this conference many years in a row. there is a fellow professional speaker who's in my world of networking. He calls himself the conference catalyst. His name is Tom Singer. And so he's about a decade ahead of me as far as establishing himself in that world. And we talked 1 year briefly. The next year, I looked for him. I went to one of his sessions, and I made sure to connect with him. And we had a more in-depth conversation. At the end of it, and he gave me a bunch of free advice, right? Because that's what people do. And I said, this is great. Can I check in with you a few months from now? I'm sure I'm going to start to have questions at that point, but I want to try the things you're saying. Can I check in with you? And he said, yeah, I'm on the road all the time. Just message me and I'll tell you whether I'm free. Like, that'd be great. And so I had to then do that. That's actually a critical step, right? Because I couldn't then be like, oh, I just didn't reach out for any number of reasons, and then wait for a whole another year to pass. So I made sure to do that. I reached out to him twice in that year. And then we saw each other at another conference. I was hosting a sort of drinks gathering. I invited him. He came. We had a great conversation. About 2 weeks ago, he texted me out of the blue. The last conference was July. So now it's like October, I guess, when he reached out to me. And just his text was, how is the adventure of your business going? And so I immediately called him because I knew he was free, and we had a great conversation. That's an example of someone who's in my personal board of directors. It's not someone I have a paid contract with. I don't talk to on any kind of regular basis, but I know that I have a question that falls under what he knows about. He knows enough about me and my business to be able to offer me support. And I'm enough on his radar that when he had a moment, he thought of me, he reached out. It didn't happen instantaneously. It's something you nurture along the way. And so you just sort of identify these people and you put the effort in. One reason that mentorship programs, in my opinion, fail is that mentees, we are the mentees, they are the mentors. Mentees are not prepared for how to make the most of these opportunities. So you have to go in with your own agenda, a really clear sense of what you want to ask about. You may even want to send them 3 questions ahead of time for them to think about. You want to make sure that they don't just like wax on and tell stories for the hour that you have together, but that you actually get to the 3 things you want to talk about. You want to, in between these connections, do other touch points, share their stuff, recommend them, write reviews for their products, suggest, things for them, etc. I mean, I have been, there's a reason I talk about Dory a lot. She's been an incredible supporter of mine for a very long time. I think highly of her. And I just see it as a benefit for me to share because I think her stuff's great. But I also know it's one little way that I am helping her. My amplification of her message, my bullhorn's going to slowly get bigger, right? So like, it's good that I have that habit that I will always think of ways to kind of weave her into the work that I do. And that gives her a little something, and in return, I'm getting so much more. So that's the personal board of directors. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about, and we'll open up for some questions, is consultants, which are people that kind of have an offer, and it's a little bit more of a done for you. It might be a little bit done with you, but they'll kind of solve it for you. That, let's say you have a WordPress issue and you're trying to add, something to your WordPress. They're not coming in to teach you how to use your WordPress. They're going to set the thing up for you. And could be really wonderful, but it could also be really intimidating. And there's a possibility that you're going to end up paying for things that you didn't really need or want or know what you're getting into. And that's the, I guess, difficulty of those relationships. The more you can, with your other resources, other supports, clarify the kind of support you need from a consultant so that you go in with a very narrow and specific request, the better. Because, you don't, or have someone read over the proposal before you sign it. Because unfortunately, if you just give someone carte blanche to charge you by the hour for a project, you might end up paying for 10 hours when you thought it was a 1-hour project. And that's the kind of thing I've seen people fall into. But I do think that part of, as we are building our businesses, we will probably need some version of a consultant, somebody who comes in and sort of makes the thing happen for us. I like to, in those circumstances, as much as possible, work with people who actually want to train me to learn something about this. So I hired a graphic designer to set up my website, and I met with him for 5 weeks in a row, 2 hours a day in person, side by side, where I was writing the content for my site and he was laying out my site. And so I was able to look over and tell him what color blue I wanted, but he was also able to show me the back end of WordPress and how to do certain things, enough so that I've actually not, it's been 4 years. I have not hired him since. So I wanted to have that learning happen, and so I structured it that way. Okay, that's the stuff that I have. There's a whole nother sort of like resources section I want to cover about productivity, tech tools, sort of the things that come up for me. I'm going to definitely include that sort of in the appendix, but I'm not going to run through it in this. I definitely cover those tools in the More program. And so if you're watching this, if you're here live, I am hosting the next More program for entrepreneurial women. Starts in January. I have currently 3 out of 4 spots filled. I'm open to the idea of even running 2 of them simultaneously. And so I am eagerly looking to talk to people who have an interest in doing that. It's a mixture for the first 90 days of one-on-one support, some masterminds and masterclasses, and then the second half of the 6 months is masterminds and more one-on-one coaching. So the goal is to get people really from where they are to where they want to be and to set their sights up. So the relationship-based business plan is what is the next 12 months look like, and what are the steps that I'm going to achieve. So that is, even from what you're hearing today, from reading this book, that's what I hope people are going to get from that. What the program does is it actually helps you do it in the accountability piece that I think when reading the book, we don't always actually do all the steps. So with that done, and you'll know to find it, robbiesimons.com/more. Turn on your mics. Is there anyone who wants to share any closing remarks, questions? Marianne.
Hi, Robbie. I had a question about the personal board of directors.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just sort of a conceptual board? I mean, it's not like they meet together, right? They don't get together as a group and...
Right. Another word for it is kitchen cabinet. I've heard that used in other settings. It's basically it's individual relationships, but collectively they're your personal board directors. They do not know each other.
Okay. Yeah, I've always been confused by that because I always assumed, even a kitchen cabinet, I assumed that they had cabinet meetings together, and I wondered how you could possibly get those high-powered people together at the same time to focus on your business.
Yeah, that would be hard.
All right, good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Hey, I have a question. You're talking
Jenny.
about co-hosting dinners.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, and I made a note to do that. Just a mechanical question. So let's say you've got 6 or 8 people, 2 co-hosts. I'm assuming that you're finding some restaurant asking in advance where they can do separate checks. And do you find anybody confused when you say I'm hosting a dinner, that they think that means you're paying for it?
I've never had anyone think that. You can say different, organize a dinner. I'm inviting you to join me as a way for us all to get to know each other. I mean, in the follow-up conversation, you can even say, I chose a restaurant where we'll have separate checks so that all of that's known ahead of time. I think outside of New York City, it's pretty easy to find restaurants that have separate checks. In New York, there's only a handful. Dory actually had a virtual assistant call dozens of places at one point to narrow the list. But I think in other cities, you'll probably have an easier time. Other things that I talked about in my first book is like a restaurant that doesn't have TVs in every direction. So that's just would be so distracting. Where the noise level is moderate to low so that you can actually hear each other. If there's a circular table, that would be better. 8 people around a circular table is much better than a long rectangle. Those are little things. And then, when you get there, you might order an appetizer for people to start out. So when I host these at a Mexican restaurant, which I tend to do, I order a double order of the fresh made guacamole and chips, and that's on the table as everyone's ordering their drinks, and then everyone orders their meals, and I get my meal, my drink, and the cost of the guacamole on my bill, and everybody else just gets their meal and their drink. And it works out really well. And I think once everyone's chosen their meal, before when they're ready to order is when you kind of go around and do a little introductions.
Wait, after they've ordered? Before they've ordered? When?
No, after, because beforehand, everyone's just sort of chatting a little bit. It's sort of loose, people are kind of arriving still. But, at some point you say, hey, we should probably look at the menu. And you get everyone's attention, and everyone looks at the menu for a few minutes, and then you're like, good, did everyone know? Awesome. And you might call the server over, get that out of the way, and then say, okay, let's start going around, because the introductions could be a quick, whiplash, just name and something, and then one by one, and there'll be something you want each person to say that might be like, I like to say things like, what can you offer, and what are you looking for? What is your favorite takeaway from this conference? That, you just ask an open-ended question that gives each person a chance to sort of share a little bit about themselves. And then what happens, Jenny, is that people will find connections. Particularly, they will find these uncommon commonalities. And so I still remember this from years ago. 2 people discovered they both had a passion for power yoga. One was a friend of mine, and one was a friend of my co-hosts. And I don't even know how it came up. One of them mentioned it, and the other one was like, and it's a particular form of yoga. And they thought that I was a genius for having brought them together. And I don't have actually the memory recall to be able to pull that off, but that's the benefit of being the convener, is that if you give people a space to bring more of themselves into the conversation and they find those uncommon commonalities, they will appreciate it, and they will appreciate you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's great.
Gina.
Awesome. Oh, I'm just pleased as punch. Thank you so much for this class. This is great.
Gina is pleased as punch. I love it.
I am.
I had something else, Robbie,
Yep.
just that, I've been the beneficiary of your gathering people together a number of times at NSA conferences. And it's so impressive to see how you do that, because that terrifies me and just not something that feels like fun at all. But so many people at conferences feel on their own or lost, or, they don't, and especially when you're going into a big room and, so even you've organized dinners inside the large dinner that we've all paid for already, but, you just organize a table within that. And people love being invited to it, I think. And it does make you stand out as somebody, somebody who knows so many other people and interesting people. And I know you make a point of getting different kinds of people with different backgrounds and stuff together. And it really is an amazing thing to watch. So maybe at some point I'll actually try doing it myself, but bravo to you for doing it. And I can see how well it works.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Marianne. And I'm now going to share the ultimate secret. The ultimate secret is that I don't like feeling left out.
Yep.
And if I don't organize a table within so we're going to a banquet, basically. You and I were going to a banquet dinner.
Right.
They were not assigned tables. There was no way to reserve a table ahead of time. And if I did not arrange, I don't assume other people are going to invite me, because most people do not do this. Not because I think people don't like me. I just think people don't think about it until they're in the room. And then I would just sort of randomly be sitting with people, which isn't horrible because we were at a big conference. But I was trying to be intentional with my time and get to know a little better the people that I had met over the course of the event, and wanted that time. I want that time. I want that space. I want to nurture that community. And so I don't just freely leave it up for, I don't let things just kind of go. I want to organize that. But I'm mentioning this because if you too feel like, oh gosh, I hate the idea of sitting by myself, I want to be with other people, then take action. I
Yeah.
mean, take control of that destiny.
Yeah.
And so it's a coping mechanism, but it happens to be one that then gives me some accolade and some recognition and people to sit with, which is actually the reason I'm doing it. All the other stuff's kind of nice, but it's still, the immediacy is I want to make sure that going to this event, I have people. Now, that event, that conference I go to now every July, last year was my 4th year. I arrive on Friday, but the event doesn't actually start till Saturday midday. But because of flights, I can't get there in time unless I go on Friday. If I'm going to pay for a hotel room, I want to have some value out of this experience. So the last 2 years, arranged a Friday night gathering for a bunch of people. And that way I landed and picked a location, made a reservation and all that. And so, before it even got started, because I've been going for a while, I know people, I was able to sort of gather together. And that's actually where Tom Singer showed up, is to one of these Friday night sort of gatherings before the event even started.
Yeah, because actually you're right. The Friday night time is often the time when you don't have plans, right. When you're not already with other people. So yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah. Anybody else? Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If anything pops to your mind as you're thinking about all this stuff, please reach out to me. I'm happy to do a one-on-one chat to help me kind of further develop the content in this book. I know there's things missing. I need to keep going back to my mind map and see where else I want to kind of fill things in. And if you want to be a very early reader of what I've got, let me know. Shoot me a note. I see hands going up. That's great. Marianne, you're not even on picture, and I can see your hand going up. So, all right, yeah, shoot me a note and let me know. And yeah, thank you for being part of this little experiment of how to write a book with a community. It's awesome. Have a great rest of your day.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Robbie. See ya.
Thanks, Rob.